It is day 10 of making a VR game. So yesterday we added the ability to turn this guy's head wherever we want so that he can look around to try to see the player. And today we're going to add the vision in. That's what this mesh collider is. It's his vision, what he can see. So now if we play the game, that's attached to his head. So he'll start running in, and wherever he's looking, you'll have that cone of vision, which is a trigger, and it's gonna let us know whatever he is looking at. So in this case, the player has a trigger, and it is gonna let us know if he looks at the player. The other thing we've done is we've added in a second waypoint, and we fixed a little bug where he was doing the moonwalk when he was go to a second waypoint. So you'll see here he's turning to move towards this waypoint right here. And as soon as this cone of vision sees the player, it's gonna log. Now maybe I should make it bigger because he probably would have seen the player by now. But I'm also going to point out that there is on our robber controller script, there's an eyesight tag. And this is the tag of the game object of what he's looking at. So right now it's nothing because he's not looking at anything. But as his eyesight makes it to the player, it's going to give us a debug.log player to let us know that the robber sees the player now. And it's going to update the tag here so that we have so that we know always what the robber is looking at on the robber controller script. So now we know the robber sees the player. He's gonna have to take an action like attack. So we'll have to get ready to defend ourselves. All right, here we go. So yesterday we had got the guy running inside, and then he looks at the object that we called point of interest, and he's actually doing inverse kinematics IK to where his chest and his head is rotating to look at wherever this point of interest is. And there was so we got Mr. Alex break here. I'm stuck. The velocity is easy, but the rotation's hard. When the NPC is asked to go to a target behind him, he starts running animation before turning around, so it looks like parallel parking. And so I wanted to try that really quick because he's running to this green target right here. But if we were to duplicate this target and move it back here behind him, and then we're going to have to make him run to that somehow. So originally the robber, this guy, we made a script on him called the robber controller. And on the robber controller, we're making him on start. We're saying go to point. But we wrote some code yesterday that checks to see if he is at the navigation target, if he makes it to the target. So that's actually in here. But when he does get to the target, I want to make him go to the next target. So for now, we'll just give him an array of transforms to go to. So right now he has transform target. So I just turned that into an array. Whoops. No, I didn't. There we go. So now this is an array of transforms. So that's going to give us a couple errors that we'll have to fix. Go to point, we could say go to the first point position by saying I keep putting it in the wrong spot by saying that. And that fixes that error. And then, so for the time, I'm just going to force it to use the first one at any place it has an error. And now we should be able to go to the robber controller. This should turn into an array. And I'm going to make it a size of 2. So I can assign both of the navigation targets. Now, I can see that I'm going to need to make a empty game object here and call these navigation targets. And because it's a master or root game object, it needs to be a 0, 0, 0. And so the 0, 2, we got the first and the second navigation target. I'm going to move those to the children. And now on the robber, we'll just assign these 2 navigation targets to the array. So now we got access to both of those, or as many as we want. So we can, at the beginning, he's going to go to the first position. And let's say if he's at the target, we can make him go to the next one. So we'll probably need a way to track what target we're at. So I'll make a private string. It may be best just to make it an integer. And the integer is going to be the same as whatever navigation target that we're at. I'll call it current target. And when I go to the point, I could set the current target. So I guess I'll just do that here. We're sending to a vector 3. Let's rename this function go to target, and instead of passing in a vector 3, we're going to pass in an integer index. That's going to match up to the array. And so when we go to target index, here we're just going to say 0. Go to target 0, and go to target is going to be current target is equal to index, of course, and that's just going to keep track of whatever destination, whatever navigation target we're at. And then we're going to say navigation set destination, and then we'll say target index dot position. So whatever number we pass in, it's going to get that number out of the array and use that position. And it's going to save the current target to the index so that we know which navigation target we are traveling to or at. And so this, when we get to the destination, which is inside of this if statement, we'll say if the let's check the length of the array. So that is target.length. I know that is 2. So if it's 2, we can say if current target plus 1, because current target is 0 right now, and this length is 2. So we're going to have to do a plus 1 to the current target, and then we're going to say if that is equal to the length. Which it is not right now, but that means it's on the last item. So we'll say if that is less than the target dot length, then we can tell it to go to the next point because we know that there is a point. So we'll say go to target, and that's going to be current target plus 1. So just to make sure, let me follow what's going to happen here. At the beginning, we got a current target, which is 0, and I say go to target 0. That goes to the target 0, so it sets the current target to 0, and then it sets the destination to this dot position. So he's going to go to that position. If he gets to that target, it's going to set at target to true. He's going to rotate, and if the current target plus 1, so 1, if 1 is less than the length, which it is right now because the length is 2, then it's going to go to the current target plus 1. So then it's going to go to number 1. Then the current target's going to be 2. It's going to set the destination to 2. He's going to get to the destination. Current target is currently 1. It's going to say if current target plus 1, 2, that's going to equal 2. So if 2 is less than 2, which it's not, then it's going to skip over that. So this should work. And if I hit play, he should run to the first object and then run to the next. And I definitely see some turning issues. For one, he starts doing this whole IK thing that we're not going to want to do. We're going to need to move this out into functions. So let me disable that so he's not looking at that object. So he runs there, he turns, and then he... Okay, so his rotation is just... Let's see what we got on the nav mesh. We got the angular speed, and that's set to 120. The angular speed is the maximum speed of rotation in degrees per second. So he's only allowed to turn 120 degrees per second. I think if we let him turn 360 degrees per second... Let's see it. He gets to his destination, and at that point I call a I-tween rotate to with a 1 second. So time. So he's going to take 1 second to rotate this way. Now, if I step through this, I'll see the I-tween script appear when he starts that rotation. And he starts doing that rotation, and I-tween is still working. And he's, at the same exact time, we've triggered to run to a point behind us. So the I-tween script is still running, and that's still controlling rotation until it finishes that rotate to function, which when it does, we're going to see this disappear. There it goes. It's gone. And as soon as it's gone, he starts rotating back as fast as he can based on angular speed to the point. So we could just say before we when we do a go to target, before we set the destination, let's say iTween.stop, and there's 6 different ones here, and the one we want to use is stop target. Stop and destroy all iTweens on a game object. iTween.stop game object. Alright, let's see how that goes. That way, if there's an iTween on this guy, when he gets there, it's just going to stop, and he's going to move on to his next point. And then what's the benefits of using iTween? What's the benefit to iTween? Well, there's all these functions that you have that easily move the camera, and what I was able to do here was say iTween.rotate to, and in one line of code I was able to call a rotation on an object where there's a lot more functions than Unity has. For example, for rotation, there's rotate add, rotate by, rotate from, rotate to, and rotate update. So there's a bunch of different ways to call rotations, and it does the linear interpolation and the tweening automatically. So I don't have to write some function in update that, well, I'm in update right here, but I don't have to write something in update that does rotation or quaternion dot lerp. So the benefit to iTween is that I can just call what type of rotation I want, and I don't have to write these custom functions in the update to use like quaternion.lerp, and so the point is the benefit is it's a lot faster and a lot easier to move and rotate and do any type of tweened or linear or interpolated movement, even if it's not linear. And there's also an extension of this on GitHub. So here it is right here, iTween.cs. So huge thanks to Bob for iTween, because it's very handy, and 8,500 lines of code here. All right, so we've taken care of the problems with the guy rotating as he's running between navigation points. Now let's make him look at the player. To look at the player, there's a good example of this in the Unity, not there, that's in your face games, in the Unity stealth game tutorial. So in the stealth game tutorial, great tutorial here. I've already built this game, so I know how it works, but I want to get this mesh. It's just a triangle, but we can get that easily from the asset store. So this is a pretty big download for a simple mesh, but that's okay. We'll wait for it. And it's going to give you an error that it's importing complete project. I'm going to say import because I'm not going to let it overwrite those project settings. Here are the project settings, so I'm going to deselect all of that. I don't want it to do that. And I don't want anything out of this package at all except one model. That model is a collision mesh for the camera. The collision mesh for the camera is in the assets models collision meshes folder. So let's move this up into my models folder, and then I can delete this other one. So this is going to be the guy's eyesight. I'm going to add a mesh collider to it. And click the convex. So you can see it's going to be at his eyes, and as he rotates his head, this collision mesh is going to rotate around. We don't need the mesh renderer. I just want the collider. So we got to have this mesh here and the mesh collider. And I think I'm going to have to make this quite a bit bigger because, or scale it at least. We'll just go to 4 on the Z. And that is a pretty narrow field of view, but we'll see how that works in the game. Go for a 1.5 here on the X. And see how that works. I'm going to position it at his eyes, and I'm going to make it a child of the robber. Collision, robber, eyesight. And so if it's a child, we should be able to make the X a 0. That looks fine. And if I hit play, we could kind of see what's going on here. That's going to be his eyesight. So anything is going to use a collider. This needs to be a trigger because otherwise it's going to be knock everything over. And let's make them so we could see the player. The player has a character controller, but that's I don't believe that's a trigger or a collider. We could find out. On the robber controller, I'm going to make a private mesh collider. Eye trigger. And when the script starts, we want to get the eye trigger is equal to transform dot get child 2. This is 0, 1, 2. So I got to make sure I don't move this child. It always should be on 2. And we're going to say get component mesh collider. That way we have access to the eye trigger. We should make a function actually for this called on trigger enter collider other. And it might be it could respond as a collision. So on collision enter, get the collision. So here we can say debug.log other.gameObject.tag, and for this one it's going to be collision dot game object dot tag, and we'll say the collision occurred on this one, and on this one it was a trigger that it touched. So here I can find out if the character controller, I just don't know if the character controller object is gonna is going to respond to that. Now apparently it didn't look at anything, so, and I find that surprising. Because I think these are colliders. Alright, so here we should be getting a on collision enter, unless it can't. Yeah, we should definitely be getting a debug.log there. But on collision enter and on trigger enter are going to respond to my collider. So I might have to move these onto a script that's on the on this game object. Let me check if there's any way to get around that. Yes, on trigger enter only gets called on the object the collider is attached to. So we could do a method like this, but let me just go ahead and add a script here. I'm going to call it, the script on the parent is called robber controller, so I'm going to call this one robber eyesight. So we'll move these two functions over to the robber eyesight. And I want to get access to the robber controller, so transform parent get component robber controller. And on the robber controller, I'll make a string. We'll make it public. We'll call it eyesight tag. And the eyesight tag is going to be the tag of the object that's in the robber's eyesight. So here we'll just say robber controller dot eyesight tag is equal to other dot game object dot tag. And same goes for this one, except it's the collision game object tag. And then the debug.log, I'll go ahead and we'll just keep it there. Let's see if we get something in the console. So it's seeing a trigger, it's seeing the player, which is exactly what we want. But it's not seeing any colliders. I think it's not having a collision because nobody has a rigid body. This cube doesn't have a rigid body, and this guy doesn't have a rigid body. So one of them needs to have it. If I were to give a rigid body to this one, I believe that, well, now it's gonna fall or something. but if I uncheck it, oh, it is trigger. So we're going to say is kinematic so it doesn't fall, and don't use gravity. And it does have no mass and no drag. Or fine, it has a little bit of mass, but it's kinematic, so that shouldn't matter. And we got trigger on something untagged. That should be the boxes. Yep, 3 of them. So, even though the boxes are not triggers, they're colliders. We're getting the on trigger enter because this mesh is a trigger. So there's not a collision isn't happening because there's not 2 physics objects colliding into each other. And here there's no collision because the box doesn't have a rigid body. So if we give it a rigid body and go back to this, then we should get an on collision enter. There it is. So now we got the collision getting called. But that's not going to happen if the objects do not have a rigid body. And right now this guy has a rigid body, but it doesn't need one. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it. And if I need it to know what actual colliders it's touching, then I'll have to go ahead and add a rigid body and make it kinematic. But for now, we just have it as a trigger. And if I need to sense objects, they're going to have a trigger. Now the player, it's sensing the player and it's logging a game object for that. So let me see what that is. So trigger, and it's player. So it must be finding my character controller. Because if I go into the scene and I uncheck the character controller, and then I grab the eyesight, and I try to make another collision enter. Yeah, there's no collision enter or trigger enter. So the character controller on the VR main is a trigger. So when the eyesight sees that, it's going to log player. Now I must have messed up I wanted to do that. Alright, so now I know when he sees the player. Now if I don't make him go to the second point, which we'll put the second point, maybe we'll move it into the bedroom. But I don't want him to go there yet. So let's go ahead and tell the robber controller to don't go to the next target just yet. But he is going to turn his head and look at the player. Never mind. He's not going to turn his head and look at the player. Because we had disabled this whole section of code. Alright, let's see what happens. He runs in, he turns his... Well, look at that. It turns out that this eyesight is going to have to be a child of the head. So we got to go to spine, chest, neck, head, and make it a child of that. And that means we're going to have to change the way that this script finds its robber controller. We're going to have to say transform.get component in parent. And there's only one robber controller up in the parent, so that should work. Transform child out of bounds. It's on the robber controller script. That's right. We got child too. And we don't need that trigger anymore. That was... I was going to try to call the on trigger enter function on this script, but that's not going to happen. Alright, so let's watch what happens here. He's going to run in, and he looks, and he can see the player, and we know he sees the player because we've got the debug.log here. In addition to that, the robber controller should have a public string on it with the eyesight tag, so we know exactly what this guy is looking at. Now we're going to have to give him a weapon and make him attack if he sees you. And I'm going to save that for day 10. Let's add the weapon on day 10. Otherwise, this video is going to get long and confusing. So today we were able to get the take care of the issues as discussed on yesterday's video. And I think maybe a good way for me to address all the questions in the comments is just to do it every day in the video. So I'll kind of try to take care of any problems like this that come up that you guys are running into that I haven't run into, like turning around and running straight backwards. I just haven't tested that out yet. So, but that's fixed now, and we got the script. At least we got the eyesight added, so we know what this guy is looking at, and the most important thing is we know when he's looking at the player, because if he sees the player, he's gonna need to change his AI and run towards the player or attack him. So in the next video, we're going to give him a weapon, and we're going to give him the ability to attack and kill the player if he sees you, which means by tomorrow, when we start the game, we should have to run for our life because this guy's pretty fast, and we're pretty much going to have to be running for cover or getting a weapon so that we can, like the chainsaw over here, the axe, so that we can defend ourselves. All right, as always, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for tomorrow's video. The adding a weapon should be pretty fun.